Hello, everybody. Welcome to our World Today Unionist Perspective, our discussion on the news. And in the Unionist Perspective, we're very happy to be here with you today. We have a few things that we'd like to discuss. The first one being about the conflict that just started between Israel and Lebanese terrorist group Hezbollah. And then we're going to also talk about the fact that um, the UN shift, the United Nations shift, has kind of a vision for the future. And I think it's kind of linked, obviously, to a situation with Hezbollah because the United Nations have called them kind of like global disaster, catastrophe. And then if we have time, we'll talk about Thailand and the first Southeast country to legalize same-sex marriage, and also about the kiwi that traveled 900 miles in order to find back its home. So let's get started. First with the news that isn't so great, and it is the fact that for about a few weeks, maybe a week, the conflict between um, Lebanon and especially like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Israel has taken root. And the fact that 2 days ago they started strikes, basically Hezbollah launched missile, I think, a few missiles to Israel that they countered, and then Israel launched its attack on Hezbollah, and already like there are hundreds of casualties, 400 civils that were affected in one strike, basically. And I do remember when we started talking about the conflict between Israel and Palestine, it was clear that there was some sort of consensus in geopolitics that it's a really bad thing globally, that it would affect the global stability of our world in terms of politics and peace. And I think Hezbollah is part of why it's such a bad thing, because it is a terrorist cell in Lebanon that can basically just do anything it wants, because since the crisis of 2020, Lebanon haven't really had much of a government, and Hezbollah has been here for a while already, and they've had attack with Israel for a few decades, and I think it may encourage some tourist cells over in the Middle East to like get into the conflict, into some sort of like escalation. And I think that's what people fear the most right now, especially the United Nations. And that's something that's pretty worrying because it speaks of not a lot of communication and leadership overall, or not good leadership in all of the countries actually. And how this can lead to just about anything. And I didn't like kind of believe that it would actually escalate to that in 2024, but it has now done so. So we may as well talk about that. So I'm just curious to know like what do you guys feel about it? Whether you know a lot about Hezbollah or not, its history and the conflict at hand. I'm sure you all have an opinion on what's going on, and the parallels that we can draw with the conflict with Israel and Palestine, because obviously this is linked. So who'd like to speak a little bit on that right now? The stage has something to say.
Yeah, I guess I would like to speak a little bit, but it's not from a place of having a ton of knowledge, but I guess just asking a question, if any of you guys can answer it. Um, I was curious as this conflict has escalated, why the current Israeli government would do this, because I was wondering. I mean, I'm aware of the fact that Hezbollah is like a threat, to Israel, just like Hamas is, right? So, and it's definitely ultimately in their interest to like neutralize that threat some way or another. But they're very clear that they feel like only a military solution can do that. But part of me is like, well, with how taxing and difficult and challenging the Gaza war has been, and with the fact that they have not achieved either of their operational outcomes in the Gaza war, like eliminating Hamas, I mean, that's kind of like a much, much more difficult thing, and freeing all the hostages. Neither of those things has been completed. So then, why would the Israeli government go out on a limb and say, now we're going to start a conflict with Hezbollah? It doesn't make any sense to me. And it also didn't make sense when they assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, the leader of the political wing of Hamas, too, because I was like, why does it seem like they only want to escalate more now, and maybe they do have maybe they do have the capability to, but I didn't see the logic in it necessarily. Maybe it's like kind of like anyone who could support Hamas, like they're trying to like basically just go after any such people. But I was just curious about it because I was like, why, how, what is, why? So would anybody like to enlighten me or help us with this?
I'm curious too because I want some clarity. I thought that Hezbollah kind of started this by, shooting the rockets, and then that's why Israel had to bring on the defense. If that's the case, then why would Hezbollah do this? You know? And I can ask that of both countries now, but if Hezbollah started the attack again, then that's that's my question. Why would they do that?
I guess in solidarity with Hamas, and they would be like, "We're just going to try to bog down Israel with this, distract them, spread them thin with that."
Yeah, so historically, as far as I recall, Hezbollah and Hamas have been almost, those strange bedfellow kind of partnerships where Hezbollah has in the past supplied Hamas with weapons. And so there is a terror partnership there that has probably been years in the making. And let's call it what it is. They do need each other. Regardless of whether we agree with their actions or not, they kind of need each other, given that there's diminished support for their behavior and their actions throughout all of these conflicts. And with Hezbollah almost being largely unchecked where they operate, they are seeming to be more powerful. And so they would find alliances with people that are perpetuating conflict for whichever reason. And I mean, it's a very interesting thing because if you put it in perspective, the three terror groups are Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas, and they all have some type of almost informal trade partnership because it's probably a lot more difficult for them to procure what they need to procure unless they have those kind of partnerships. So the part that it kind of makes sense to me because of the strange bedfellow need I mean, I don't advocate for any of the behavior, but if I have to look at it tactically, it makes tactical sense for them to be partnered in this way because they don't have the levels of support that normal uprightly functioning spaces would have. So what do? You augment your Terra network with other Terra networks. It kind of makes sense. It's a very tactical move. It's literally the strategy of keeping each other supplied. And if we look at it in terms of a type of business arrangement, it makes sense. People form partnerships all the time.
Yeah, I would agree that this is pretty much what is happening. It's been like that for a while. And it was already like that since October of last year because Hezbollah was pretty much doing like very um, you know, isolated small attacks at the border with Israel. The difference here is that when Hamas's leader was assassinated, they decided to launch 150 missiles on Israel. And because Israel knows that Hezbollah is in bed with Hamas, they just decided to respond the same way, I would say. It's kind of confusing because it's difficult to always gauge the intentions behind Israel because there's some good like secure the hostages or the hostages bodies, remnants, and have some sort of peace for the Israelis. But also there is this conqueror relationship that they have with the land and with other people around them that pushes them to, it seems, always go too far. And it would explain like the number of civilians that have been impacted for the past year already by this conflict. And how there's no regards to that because in their consciousness, there is nothing that can be done except respond um, with military means. And that's just it until like they get what they want, which is like what Hamas basically refused, which was, I guess, a truce that was more in favor of Israel, I would say. But again, there was always this problem of like um, in both like almost a problem of like pride that escalated this too far. And as long as Israel sees the land overall, not everybody, but overall as theirs because it's some sort of religious promised land and people can just like live in peace with us, but outside of our borders, supposed borders, it will have a conqueror vibe and it will always do things that are against human rights. And as long as other countries allow themselves not to be led by a strong leadership, but by terrorist groups, because this is what it is, and allows themselves to also be led by anger, we will have always responses that are that are overkill, no pun intended, from all sides of conflicts like that, which have been here for almost 80 years now. So I just feel like personally I feel tired of seeing it. And I would hope that people would feel tired of always doing the same responses and always saying that it never changes. And I think there is a lot of lay down of pride that needs to happen here. And not just for them, but also for us, because this conflict has already been the terrain of, I was discussing that with my best friend this afternoon, like the terrain for people taking sides and profiting off of it to just abuse who they see as others. And it seems like some of the lessons from World War II have still not been ingrained, and that doesn't feel right to me. So that's the only thing that I would say here. I don't pretend to be like an expert of the Middle East, although I did study it a little bit. But I think anyone can see if they truly like get clear within themselves how it is wrong on all sides, all parties, to have a conflict to such an extent.
I'm glad you brought up the point of pride because the bottom line that I'm feeling here is envy. Envious of Israel for gaining such financial stability and seeing that there's things that they just cannot compromise because of pride. And it seems that no matter how they negotiate a peace, one party wants the biggest chunk, and one party cannot handle that that party gets a bigger chunk, whether it be land, whether it be any negotiable tactics. And it's come to the point where neither leaders are justified in leading their people because both sides are getting killed. And personally, I just feel that being involved in a terrorist group is a no-go. Like right now, we can think of Israel kind of like a genocide terrorist group, but not really, not as much as Hezbollah has blatantly killed Americans and others just to show that you are not in the right. You are not deserving of living this righteous life, you know? And so it's just both sides are unacceptable. And for Benjamin Netanyahu to say that they are willing to go to any extent is also not acceptable. There needs to be some type of compromise that can be win-win for both of them. And if they do continue to carry their envy and their pride, it will never be peace. You cannot find peace within those two.
I so agree. Like he has lots of support of the United States in many ways already, and he will say like no matter what, even with or without support, he will keep going. So even though like there is some rights in the response, the military response, even though like the tactic and the strategy is not good at all, what I feel like what really stops him from towing the line of being just like Putin in Russia in the next few years and saying that lands of other people in all the Middle East are righteously ours, and I will not stop at I will not stop at this bend. I will not stop at the south of Lebanon. And obviously it's really different because like it's about like a religious border as well. But I don't know, it just feels like even with this justification, which to me is not, it just feels like allowing um, someone to take again and again. And we know that when someone is allowed to take again and again and abuse, even in small ways, even for righteous opinions, like it cannot end well in some way. So I just wonder like what is the containment that we can have except for the United States announcing in the media that this is a catastrophe? Like, don't we have any power there? And yeah.
So something that probably feels to me like the core of it is all of this behavior seems to kind of be driven out of anger. But if you look at the core of it, anger is the grown sister of hurt or sadness. And so there's an underlying wound that's not being healed. And from an unhealed perspective, when that wound is touched, there is retaliatory behavior. It's just that it's almost unfortunately a natural reaction to poking a wound. So there is a point at which there has to be a level of cauterization, rightly or wrongly, unfortunately, because healing needs to set in some way or another. So the only way that the healing actually starts to be a consideration and even for people to start going down the route of healing is when the pain of the wound is bigger than the pain of the outside actions. So it's unfortunate that this type of thing is driving into that hurt space, but I feel like it almost serves a purpose to pick at it so that new choices can be made. It's not a great way to do it, and we don't advocate for learning through contrast. But the only way that the lesson is going to be learned under these circumstances is for the contrast to become that much more prevalent so that new choices can be made. And for as long as people are choosing not to heal, new choices are not going to be made here. And the other point of these three terrorist parties all getting together and forming little factions and stuff like that. In South Africa, we have this saying that says nothing brings a bunch of arseholes together other than something that's not their business.
I want to clear this unclarity of this, woven string of history that that is bringing this hurt about into bouts of upheaval and violence. From my perspective, okay, so I was listening to a speech of a Holocaust survivor who was giving a speech to Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton about how, thankfully, US has intervened and helped with World War II. Now, those who have survived and the people of the people have moved to Palestine, but it was given to them through America and other countries. And what I perceive, it was not their right to give them a land that was not theirs. But they did because they needed that land. After the Holocaust, they needed some place safe to move to. Now, they're hurt because they were given a land that was not theirs, but okay, we will claim it as our birthright and we will safely make passage here. And then Palestine's hurt because they were taken from and felt powerless for America and other countries to decide this without their consent. Now we have people of Jewish descent hurt because of the Holocaust, given a land to them because they had nowhere else to go, and this seemed like the easy, good solution for them. And now we have people of Palestine hurt because they had to compromise. The way I see it is we are one. If your brothers and sisters need help and you have the resources for it, please do help them. However, it was never anyone's right to force someone to help another and give someone something that was not theirs. Given that, how can we resolve this now? The way I see it is they're your brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, you were at a time of powerlessness where your land was taken from you, but it was taken for a good reason. Can you see that? Can you see that this was done for all of humanity? And can you accept that with peace? And not be envious of your brothers and sisters for being successful and building their finances, building their life into something you wish you could have done. So please go ahead and do it, but do not discriminate on those who can do it, and do not kill others for standing by that. That's not okay. That's how I see it.
There's a lot here. There's a lot because the map through which Israel and Palestine was separated and distributed after World War II was something that was already in a treaty in the 19th century done by the British, with no consent of Palestine anyway. And when Israeli people, there were already like Jewish people, immigrants in Palestine in the 30s, 1930s, and Palestinians were already mad at that. And then this happened, and it led way to 8 decades of conflict, more or less, with times of relative peace, where one side would do terrorist attacks on the others, and one would discriminate so much that the hurt would continue. And I understand the reluctance from any other country to really intervene there because the treaty done by the British uh, participated in this. I think it would have still happened because I think Jewish people were still wanting to immigrate there ever since things started getting sour in the 20th century, even before the Holocaust. But it didn't help, that treaty. Why was it respected even though like people would not agree? And why did it continue? And then with all the things, the history of the US in the Middle East and the failures, I don't think anyone wants to venture there. And I don't think that's a solution that either none of you have given the solution, but I just wanted to touch upon it because that's part of the history of things that Nadia was speaking to. We have to come to healing there. There is just no solution. There is so much irrational stuff that is happening and hate crimes from one to the other and vice versa, that the only thing that I can see is just like basically healing the hurt. But where to begin if like no one on either side wants to listen? And do we have a say in it? Because like we could intervene all we want, and I really would like to, but I don't think they have chosen to stop. And it's really like a year into this conflict. I'm not glad about this conclusion, but we must admit that they will go into war if they want to go into war, because like the BBC was basically saying that the Lebanese people don't want to go into war. Don't they? Because why would you let yourself be non-governed for so long? Non-governed so much that Hezbollah would like have half of the country and participate into this hate speech that would then lead them to continue their attack until they send like 150 missiles. Isn't that a way to say like we attack, but then we wash our hands, we're just victims? And then when Israel attack, oh, see, they're killing us. See, they're bad, they're a devil. I think that's a strategy, and I'm not good about it. But the truth of the matter is, Netanyahu wants to go to war. Oh, I don't know. Will there be a war? We'll see, says he, as if it was like choosing dinner. And the others, they want to provoke that war. So what are we choosing here? Is truly the question.
And I think you've raised a very important point, Irene, in that what are we actually choosing here? Because part of it, I mean, that the core of it is definitely hurt. But as Nadia was speaking through it, there's also there's a core part of it that literally reminds me of something I learned very early when and I was a Sunday school teacher. And you know that I learned that quite early that somebody said to me, you what you need to pay attention to is not the bad behavior of these children. It's the fact that the children that need the most love ask for it in the most unusual ways. And I think that's really the core of the message here. They are not, first of all, they're not necessarily young nations, but they're also acting out almost adolescent pain. And the core of it literally is love. But they're just choosing not to see each other's humanity so that they can get around the table. And for as long as they choose not to see each other's humanity, some people are going to act in ways that feel really bad. Some people are going to retaliate in ways that are really bad, that feel really bad. And then there are going to be those people that sit on the fence and get spikes in their cheeks, kind of thing, you know. So there's a thing that says, yes, we don't like this, we feel like it's proper crap, but also at the end of the day, there's a big piece that says there's a significant requirement for compassion because the thing that's lacking is probably just a shitload of love.
Yes, a shitload of love. And I wanted to express that Palestine is feeling powerless, just like they did in the beginning when Israel came into their land. And then Israel is feeling righteousness, and which is causing them to continue this war, thinking that they can claim something that is not theirs. And when I feel that there's a conflict within my life of this seeing outward between two people, all I can do is surrender and allow God to intervene in the way God teaches best. Because if they continue with this powerlessness and lack mentality and this righteousness, there's no other way other than for God to intervene and all of us to surrender because no one can resolve this but God.
Yeah. And that righteousness stems from lack. So you can see how this is really like the same upset. Anyway, our reality would have you say that it looks different as for different circumstances, and oh, the religious factors are different. Oh, the history is different. Oh, we suffered greater, but it doesn't really matter. Like it's still the same. It's still the same upset. And I would like to kind of discuss the role of the United Nations in all of that, because more than ever this is important, and the Nations chief, António Guterres, just spoke about that, and the United Nations was modified, named United Nations after World War II because of that, because of this conflict, because of world wars, because of the Cold War. because of the Israel-Palestinian conflict, it's literally seen it from the very beginning because we were born, I think, 2 years apart, like United Nations in 1945 and the conflict in 1947 when the map was drawn. And there is something there that we need to discuss, even though like there is no actions really, we don't know the technicalities. I would like to read 2 paragraphs from the Indian Express where they related um, António Guterres and his words. And they say Guterres' original vision outlined transformative reforms covering artificial intelligence, UN Security Council restructuring, including having African nations getting into the council, even though without veto power, climate action, peace operations, and development financing. However, according to critics, prolonged negotiations have led to a watered-down version of the document, which now lacks the specificity originally intended. And I read it as boundary, like the boundary limits originally intended, but we can talk about that later. And speaking at a press conference, Guterres highlighted the urgent need for change. International challenges are moving faster than our ability to solve them, he said, referencing ongoing conflicts in Ukraine, Gaza, and Sudan, amongst other things like climate change. And that phrase a little bit, you know, bittersweet, confusing, because like conflicts are moving faster than our ability to solve them is something saying like we build the United Nations for it, but we don't have the power to solve them. And I'm like, well, what the fuck? If there is anyone who can intervene, not as a country, but as an overall global intervention of international rights and treaties, this is you. And you're saying you don't have power. And I understand, but also I don't. I think there is a level of like bureaucratization. I don't know if you say that in English, but like the bureaucracy of getting intervenes, like I don't know, getting very muddy into laws and treaties and discussions until we do nothing. And I think we've seen a lot of that in the last 30 years with countries. And maybe I'm a bit harsh, but I'm also very peaceful with my speech, and I think that's what I feel, that's what I see right now. And I don't necessarily like it, but I know that everyone has a different opinion of it. And maybe I'm a little bit disillusioned too because I studied it at length, but I would love to have your perspective on it and see what we can get out from this because obviously like I'm open to like having a change of mind. But I would love to know how you guys really feel about this. Like Sage maybe or Grenville.
So I think you touched on something very important in what is actually the true purpose of the United Nations. Because the challenge for me is that, I mean, there's probably bodies of lengths of treaties that have been signed throughout history that are still relevant. And you read something and then you hear there's a sub-treaty to that. And then there's this accord and that convention. And it starts to feel like the United Nations is about writing documents and opinion votes more than anything, because I don't feel like there's true action. I mean, admonishing somebody for their bad behavior only feels bad for the length of which the speech takes place, and then they walk out of the place and, well, what happens? So we start to apply sanctions and those kind of things. And then in the case of Russia, they find new bedfellows and they start to do different things. And it feels like as much as we've pulling together into the United Nations has partially turned into a talk fest. And I feel like part of the problem is that potentially the power of the United Nations to act needs to be extended. And I mean, we spoke about this last year with places like Sweden joining the United Nations with their extended military capability and all that. So there's definitely greater power in the almost in the conglomerate because they're pooling resources. The challenge is at which point do they start using those resources, and at which point does that then just create additional escalation? So, it might feel like frustrating because they're not doing anything or not being seen to really do anything. But if they were to act, would that make the situation better or worse? And then my sense is that it would probably make the situation worse. And that's probably why they do not act in that way. Their purpose is primarily probably more defensive than offensive.
And I would like to add that someone in the article said that the UN system is only as good as its members. So what do you guys think that shows of the countries? Do you think it stems of apathy or maybe fear or of angering your ally? Because there may be a number of reasons why this is not working. And it's on each country as a whole, as a global system to figure it out, but also like how can we have an effective United Nations if the system can only be as good as when no one vetoes a decision that you're taking. So that is a little bit confusing. So do you think like you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I feel like it makes sense that the United Nations would not be able to resolve or help resolve a lot of conflicts in the world because the United Nations is supposed to be like just that, it has to be a united effort by all nations to get something done or by like all the nations involved, right? Like in the case of the Security Council, right? Because some nations have veto power and this permanent seat on the Security Council, including Russia. That's a great example of this problem. So, like, if countries involved don't want something to happen, it's not the United Nations' place to override that and try to do something because I think, like Granville was saying, it can create more harm than good potentially because nations don't want to feel like there's a like supranational government. Is that the word for it? Or like that there's like an international government, and it's not just like right-wing conspiracy theorists in the US who like are concerned about that. It's every country. Like no country wants to be like, oh, some other authority is coming in and saying like this is how things are going to go. Like so by definition or by nature, I don't think the UN can function like that. Something like NATO, which I think Granville, you were referring to Sweden joining NATO, right? Last year. Not the UN, right? Of course. Like NATO can function. Like NATO is capable of doing things because generally all the countries in it have the same intention of preserving this peace and democracy among their member states. And you can usually cajole and diplomatically pressure the trickier nations like Hungary and Turkey into doing and falling in line, like we had with Sweden joining NATO and Turkey was blocking it. And then some unreported, unannounced backroom type of dealings went on, and Turkey was like, okay, fine, you go ahead. we're going to drop this whole political like charade going on in Turkey, or not a charade, what was the thing? Like maneuver, right? And so something happened. They got what they wanted, maybe, and it worked out. But the UN isn't like that. And it's like, if there are countries that have like a really different intention in a certain matter or even overall than other countries, like Russia wanting to like have a more like they don't like the current system of laws and checks and balances and like international accords and stuff, like they don't agree with that, you can't really get anywhere. Like if Russia has a veto in the Security Council, you can't, the Security Council doesn't do anything, then they literally cannot do anything. And it, if we feel upset by that, why can't the United Nations do anything? I think it's just incumbent on us to take back our own power and heal these upsets of like what it's reflecting in us, so that we can build a more peaceful inner world and a divine life for ourselves. And that kind of grows out. And it seems like, oh, that's not doing anything. It's actually very profound. The more people do it, the more compounding of an effect that it has. The UN trying to be like, oh, you should come and try to resolve these conflicts. It's kind of putting the cart before the horse. I mean, it's good to have that, don't get me wrong. Like, yes, create as much international agreement as you can. Yes, create as much negotiating power as you can. Right on. But with the only place where we truly have power is starting with ourselves and our own choices and what we do and how we build our lives. And so that's the horse. And then the cart behind it is like the consciousness we're seeing played out in our nations and in the United Nations. So that's how I feel about it. So not surprised, and it's okay. UN, just do what you can. That's how I feel. Does anyone else have a piece on that though?
I do actually.
Okay.
The mental image that I got was that of, how can I explain this? I got a mental image of like the UN created after World War II. Obviously, it was already the Society of Nations before, but like it's the end of World War II like strengthened this want and need for international laws, which we didn't necessarily have before. We only have through individual treaties. So there was really like consensus to try to have as many treaties that could encompass all countries all at once, and laws that could encompass them as well, and discussions and communication, which is good. And obviously not to be taken for granted, but I feel like where the imbalances is that there is nothing we can do to act, and I think the United Nations chief is doing the best he can, but there's still this feel of powerlessness, and I don't blame the United Nations for it. I just feel like um, because it is a mirror of obviously the entire world, I do feel like there is some, not apathy, but maybe some restraint to move forward with changing habits, kind of like a human being having difficulty changing habits that he knows aren't necessarily good. They were filled after World War II by the traumatizing experience of having a world war that did so much damage that everyone was pretty much agree for several decades, even with the Cold War, that they never wanted to have a physical conflict of that scale again. And I think we're still choosing that at a certain level, or otherwise, like I would say that World War III would have already been upon us. But there is not as much incentive as before to um, to I guess preserve that non-physical conflict thing. And the UN interacts with the others as a peace reestablishment. So it must be kind of where they know that the peace is going to start soon again. I think maybe that's the energy, or I don't know, or where they feel like they can help. And obviously, like that's not possible at this time in several conflicts in the world. And there's just something to that, which I don't know how to express, but if I feel into it, I feel like I wanted to say something very important, but I'm not sure how to explain it. Yeah, but basically, yeah, it feels like the core of everything is that we seem to have incentive only when things hurt, which I don't blame people. Like I think everyone does that, and things seems to hurt no matter how true or false they are for Russia, and it seems to hurt for Palestine, seems to hurt for Lebanon, seems to hurt for Israel. And so there is incentive to act irrationally or not. Um, and then maybe we do have some sort of like kind of apathy to life because we say like, oh, stability is just staying where we are. And we're not seeing that stability is just like progressing and always moving as countries, right? And so that it's not just like moving pawns on a chessboard, but like really actually moving, which is something we have touched upon a little bit last week. And I think this is a core component because as long as we move through the incentive of hurt or don't move at all because we think that the stagnation is a good feeling, we may have limitations of the power of the United Nations again and world conflicts. And so these are big stuff that we're talking about right now. Very big stuff, but I hope it makes kind of sense. We don't have to dissecate and have complete answers right now, but it's just like a feeling that I'm just trying to just begin to chip at. So, bear with me. But I'm really curious about like what you can respond to that if you have any response to that right now.
So as Sage was sharing and you were sharing, and something that struck me that's probably something that I missed is that the UN is probably serving its purpose perfectly because it's elevating the level of consciousness amongst nations, kind of like our conversation is doing for our community. So for the community of nations, it's serving its purpose. It's leveling up the mindset that certain things are just actually not okay, and that certain things need to be addressed. And I feel like what it's achieved is that there's probably a shitload fewer conflicts that have played out than could have played out. Because again, as Sage, and I agree with Sage, their purpose is not to act, but their action is to elevate thinking, is to elevate the engagement with other nations. But it's not to override the sovereignty of other nations. And I don't think any other nation is going to stand for it anyway. So the thing that would be very interesting would be if NATO became the hammer behind the UN. Because again, it's literally about that thing of you can't only be a barking dog. At some point, there has to be a level of fight. So I definitely think there's a case to be made for potentially stronger partnership so that the nations that are part of the UN and part of NATO kind of agree to being almost the implementation leg of that kind of, listen, stop your crap. Like that's the line. Stop your crap, or otherwise we are going to have to act more decisively against you.
Right. I don't see it happening.
No, I don't see it happening either, but it would be an interesting
It
proposition, right?
would be. I used to think that when I was a child, but um, I feel like countries are communicating like, oh, I'm already doing my part. I'm bringing how as much harmony as I can by being in this organization. Stop trying to make me commit more to more harmony by uniting with other organization or something like that. I don't know, but that's a feeling that I always have, and so. I haven't had the idea of like uniting international organizations for a long time, but I wish it could happen easily. I don't think it could happen easily though. But yeah, that's definitely a desire for sure. Sage, do you want to say something quickly?
Yeah, I think that to some extent NATO does kind of represent the United Nations in a way because I, I could be wrong because like I haven't read about this very much recently because there's like so much going on, but I think a majority of nations doesn't support Russia's war in Ukraine, right? Right? Like when their United Nations votes, like they like hold these votes to like end the war in Ukraine, like it's like a resolution of the desire to end the war in Ukraine. Is that right? Yeah. So like a majority, definitely like a majority of nations like agrees with them in that particular case. So like they do kind of represent like the will of at least the majority of nations, but like something like NATO, like we were saying, like it can only function because like all of its member states have like some agreement, I guess, about like what the intention is, right? And then like because Russia's a part of the UN, NATO could never fully represent the UN like completely, and because we're seeing like this divide or like this like continued divide, I guess, between the nations that kind of want this stable, I'm going to say more peaceful, like international system, and the nations that kind of want the like pillage and plunder and make alliances of convenience type of system, like the system from before all of this. Like we have Russia and Iran and North Korea and China to some extent. And like that's like you can't have agreement. How can you have agreement there? But I loved what you said, Granville, about the UN being more like a thought leader, like nations coming together to like agree on different things, at least at the thought level, because it helps at a higher level than like what actions you can take physically. So I thought that was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I also liked what Granville had said about that. And I feel like we're having too much expectation on the UN. Like you guys were saying that we can't all like agree to come together and put that power into the UN. But really, we can't because we need to do the healing ourselves. The UN cannot do the healing for each individual country that's a part of it. They can bring awareness to it, like Granville was talking about, but at the end of the day, everyone has to do their own healing.
Yeah, it's pretty much to finish off this. What I gathered for myself and from everything that we talked about tonight, it's more about not seeing the UN as a they outside of your power, but really as a we, like a concerted action. And it's just a we of like countries. It's about the people inside the countries as well, because we kind of guide the direction, the consciousness the choices of a country, no matter if it's like conscious or not. Like culture is a big part of this. So yeah, seeing this as not outside of your power, not as a they have to act, but like we have to act and what can be done at my level. And sometimes it's just to feel your feelings, to make a choice to feel better. That was a full-on discussion tonight, my friends. Thank you. It was nice. Thank you to everyone who has watched this live in the group, the Facebook Unity group discussion, and to everyone who's watching us from YouTube. And if you enjoy these types of discussion, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, so we can do more of those and offer your opinions, topics that we can share in the next few weeks. We'd love to have them. So hope you have a good day and see you soon.